Aloha champions and welcome back. Today's another reading of Sing Down the Moon. We will be finishing up this book by next week. In class, we've been talking a little bit about Arizona history to kind of give us a little bit more background information on what's been happening. So hopefully we're making connections between the history that Mr. Chambers has been helping us understand and this fictional story based in historical events. So, the Long Knives have asked for the Navajo to leave the Canyon de Chelly. Everybody right now is safe up on a mesa, hidden away from the Long Knives. With that being said, we're going to dive into chapter 15 and 16 and see where the story progresses from there. Chapter 15. In the morning, guards were set again at the head of the trail. Running Bird and I, we crawled to our places near the pinyon tree and crouched there as the sun rose and shone down on the camp of the Long Knives. Other lookouts hid themselves along the rim of the mesa, among the rocks and the bush. Nothing had changed in the night. There were the same number of tents among the trees and the same number of horses tethered on the riverbank. Our hogans were deserted. No smoke rose from the ovens or the fire pits. There was no sound of sheep bells. The camp of the Long Knives was quiet until the sun was halfway up in the morning sky. Men strolled about as if they had nothing to do. Two were even fishing in the river with long willow poles. Then, while Running Bird and I watched a squirrel in the pinyon tree trying to coax him down with a nut, I saw from the corner of an eye a puff of smoke rise slowly from our village. It seemed no larger than my hand. But a second puff rose in the windless air, and a third. Our homes are burning! The words came from the lookout who was far out on the mesa rim, closest to the village. It was passed from one lookout to the other, at last to me, and I ran back to our camp and told the news to my father. "We will build new homes," he said. "When the Long Knives leave, we will go into the forest and we will cut timber. We will build hogans that are better than those that the soldiers burned." "Yes," people said when they heard the news, "we will build a new village." Tall Boy said nothing. He sat working on his lance, using his teeth in one hand, and he did not look up. I went back to the pinyon, and my father went with me. All our homes had burned to the ground. Only gray ashes and a mound of earth marked the place where each once stood. The Long Knives were sitting under a tree eating, and their horses cropped the meadow grass. My father said they will ride away now that they have destroyed our village. But they did not ride away. While we watched, 10 soldiers with hatchets went into our peach orchard, which is still held at summer leaves. Their blades glinted in the sunlight. Their voices drifted up to us where we were huddled among the rocks. Swinging the hatchets as they sang, the soldiers began to cut the limbs from the peach trees. The blows echoed throughout the canyon. They did not stop until every branch lay on the ground and only bare stumps, which looked like a line of scarecrows, were left. Then at last the Long Knives stripped all the bark from the stumps so that they would not have this to eat when we were starving. "Now they will go," my father said, "and they will leave us in peace." But the soldiers laid their axes aside. They spurred their horses into a gallop and rode through the cornfield, trampling the green corn. Then they rode through the field of ripening beans and the melon patch until the fields were no longer green, but the color of red earth. "We will plant more melons and corn and beans," my father said. "There are no seeds left," I said, "and if we had seeds and planted them, they would not bear before next summer." We watched while the soldiers rode back to their camp. We waited for them to fold down their tents and to leave. All that day and the next, we watched from the rim of the mesa. On the third day, the soldiers cut out all their poles and made a large lean-to, which they roofed over with branches. They also dug a fire pit and started to build an oven and mud and stones. It was then that we knew that the Long Knives did not plan to leave our canyon. They have learned that we are camped here, my father said. They do not want to climb the cliff and attack us. It is easier to wait there by the river until we starve. Chapter 16. Clouds blew up next morning and it began to rain. We cut brush and limbs from the pinyon trees and we made shelters. That night, after the rain stopped, we went to the far side of the mesa where our fires could not be seen by the soldiers, and we cooked our supper. Though there was little danger that the soldiers would attack us, my father set guards to watch the trail. We were very careful with our jars of water, but on the sixth day the jars were empty. That night my father sent 3 of us down the trail to fill the jars of water. We left soon after dark. There was no moon to see by, so we were a long time getting to the river. When we started back up the trail, we covered our tracks as carefully as we could. But the next day, the soldiers found that we had been there. After that, there were always 2 soldiers at the bottom of the trail, at night and during the day. The water we carried back lasted longer than the first. When the jars were nearly empty, it rained hard for 2 days, and we caught water in our blankets and we stored it. We also discovered a deep stone crevice filled with rainwater, enough for the rest of the summer. But the food we had brought with us, though we ate only half as much as we did when we were home in the village, was running low. We ate all of the corn and slaughtered the sheep that we had brought. And we ground up the sheep bones and made a broth, which was hard to swallow. We lived on this for 2 days, and when it was gone, we had nothing to eat. Old Bear, who had been sick since we came to the mesa, he died on that 3rd day. And that night, the baby of Shining Tree, she died. The next night was the first night of the full moon. It was then that my father said, "We must leave." Dawn was breaking high over the mesa when we reached the bottom of the trail. There was no sign of the soldiers. My father led us northward through the trees, away from our old village and the soldiers' camp. It would have been wiser if we had traveled in the riverbed, but there were many who were so weak that they could not walk against the current. As soon as it grew light, we found patches of wild berries among the trees, and we ate them while we walked. The berries were ripe and sweet and gave us strength. We walked until the sun was overhead then, because 4 of the women could not go no further. So we stopped, and we rested in a cave. We gathered more berries and some roots and stayed there until the moon came up. Then we started off again, following the river northward, traveling by the moon's white glow. When it swung westward and left the canyon in darkness, we lay down among the trees. We had gone no more than 2 leagues in a day and 1 part of a night, but we were hopeful that the soldiers would not follow us. In the morning, we built a small fire and we roasted a basket of roots. Afterward, the men held council to decide whether to go on or stay where we were camped. "They have burned our homes," my father said. "They have cut down the trees of our orchard. They have trampled our gardens into the earth. What else can the soldiers do to us that they have not already done?" "The Long Knives can drive us out of the canyon," my uncle said, "and leave us to walk the wilderness." At last, it was decided that we'll stay here. We set about the cutting of the brush and poles to make shelters. About mid-morning, while we were still working on lean-tos, the sound of hooves striking stone came from the direction of the river. Taking up his lance, Tallboy stepped behind a tree. The rest of us stood in silence. Even the children were silent. We were like animals who hear the hunter approach, but from terror we cannot flee. The long knives came out of the trees in a single file. They were joking among themselves, and at first they did not see us. The leader was a young man with a red cloth knotted around his neck. He was looking back, talking to someone. As he came near the place where Tallboy stood hidden, Tallboy stepped from behind the tree squarely in his path. Still, the leader did not see him. Raising the lance, Tallboy quickly took aim and drew back, ready to send it toward the leader of the long knives. He had practiced with the lance before we came down the mesa, time after time during all of the day, trying to get used to throwing it with his left hand. With his right hand, he had been the best of all warriors. It was with a lance that he had killed that brown bear beyond Rainbow Mountain, a feat of great skill. But now, as that iron-tipped weapon sped from his grasp, it did not fly straight. It wobbled and then curved upward, struck a branch of the tree, and fell broken at the feet of the soldier's horse. The horse suddenly stopped tossing its head. Only then did the soldier turn to see the broken lance lying in front of him. He looked around, searching for the enemy who had thrown it. He looked at my father, at my uncle, at me. His eyes swept the small open space where we stood. The women, the children, the old people, all of us still too frightened to move or to speak. Tallboy, as soon as he had thrown that lance, dodged behind the tree where he had hidden before, backed away into the brush, and he quietly disappeared. I saw his face as he went past me. He no longer looked like a warrior. He looked like a boy, crushed and beaten, who flees for his life. The rest of the long knives rode up and surrounded us. They searched us one by one, making certain that no one carried a weapon. Then they headed us down the canyon. We passed the ruined fields of beans and corn and melons, the peach trees stripped of their bark and branches, our burned out houses. We turned our eyes away from them and set our faces. Our tears were Soon, we were to learn that others bore the same fate, that the whole nation of the Navajos was on the march, with the long knives at their backs. The clans were moving, the bitter water, under his cover, the red house, trail to the garden, standing house, red forehead, poles strung out. All of the Navajos were marching into captivity. And with that, that concludes chapters 15 and 16 of today's reading. You've got 5 to 10 questions to answer in Google Classroom, so take your time to answer those, and I will talk to you real soon. Stay awesome.